My name is Greg, but I can't reveal my real identity for my own safety. I worked as a prison warden for over a decade. I've seen things in my time that most people wouldn't believe. What happens behind bars, behind those thick walls, is something the public never gets to see. We're told that prisons are places for punishment, but the truth is much darker. If you think prisons are about justice, then you've been lied to. The reality is, I learned the hard way that what goes on in those cells is a reflection of everything that's wrong with our criminal justice system. It's a system that profits off suffering, controls lives, and leaves a trail of destruction in its wake. But no one talks about it, and it's time for the truth to come out. When I first started as a prison warden, I thought it was just about maintaining order, making sure the inmates followed the rules, and keeping the facility running. I was trained to enforce discipline, manage staff, and handle security. But the more I worked there, the more I saw how wrong everything was. The prison system is designed to keep people in line, but no one tells you how it's done. Guards are overworked, understaffed, and the pressure to keep everything under control becomes overwhelming. I noticed something disturbing. Inmates weren't being rehabilitated. They weren't being given any real chance at redemption. They were being broken down, kept in a cycle of violence, and fed into a system that cared nothing about them beyond how much profit they could generate. I began seeing signs of this everywhere: overcrowding, mental health issues ignored, and a culture of violence that was allowed to thrive. It wasn't about rehabilitation anymore. It was about control and profit. And I was starting to understand that I wasn't just part of the system. I was part of a machine that was failing everyone involved. One day, something happened that opened my eyes completely. I was walking through one of the cell blocks when I overheard a conversation between two guards. They were talking about a new policy that was about to be implemented, a special deal with a private corporation. The plan was to rebrand the prison as a high-security facility where inmates would be used for labor, at a fraction of the cost of actual prison operations. I didn't think much of it at first, but the more I looked into it, the more I realized that this was just the tip of the iceberg. Private corporations were making billions off of cheap labor, using inmates to perform everything from manufacturing products to working in call centers, all while they were behind bars. And the worst part? The prison system was incentivizing this by keeping prisoners locked up longer, making them work longer hours for less pay, all to benefit these corporations. It didn't stop there. I began receiving pressure from higher-ups to keep quiet about certain incidents. Prison fights, deaths, and other problems that could affect the prison's bottom line. The focus wasn't on keeping inmates safe or rehabilitating them. It was about making sure the prison kept running smoothly for profit. The more I uncovered, I began to see the full picture. Overcrowding wasn't a mistake, it was by design. The longer people stayed incarcerated, the more money the prison system made. The more inmates they locked up, the more private companies had to pay them to use their labor. And the violence? It was the result of a system designed to dehumanize those trapped in it. Prisoners weren't viewed as people anymore. They were commodities. But it didn't stop there. The worst part was seeing the families. They were never told the full truth. They were told their loved ones would be rehabilitated, that prison was a place for them to pay their debt to society. But I knew better. I saw the truth of what was happening behind those walls, and it was something the public couldn't and shouldn't know. The final straw came when I realized that my job wasn't to ensure justice. It was to keep the system running. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I had become part of a machine that exploited its own people for profit. Inmates, guards, and even families were all trapped in the system. It wasn't about fairness. It wasn't about justice. It was about money. I started speaking with former inmates, listening to their stories of how they were mistreated and manipulated. Some had been in prison for minor crimes, others for much longer than they should have been. Many of them told me the same thing. They had no chance to turn their lives around. They were just waiting for the system to decide when they were done with them. I couldn't stay in that world anymore. I couldn't continue being part of a system that hurt people for the sake of profit. I knew I had to make a choice. I could either stay silent and keep my job, or I could expose the truth and risk everything. I chose to speak out. I took everything I had learned and started sharing it with anyone who would listen. Journalists, activists, and even some of the prisoners' families. I knew that it wouldn't be easy. The system was too powerful, and they would fight to keep the truth hidden. But I couldn't live with the guilt of staying silent. The moment I spoke out, the consequences came fast. My career was over, my reputation destroyed. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the people I had trusted turned on me. The prison system made sure to bury the story, to discredit me, and to protect their interests. Even now, as I look back, I know that I've only scratched the surface. The prison system is a business, and the people behind it don't care about the lives they ruin. They only care about making money. I was part of that system for too long, and now I'm trying to make sure the truth gets out. If you want to know more about what really goes on behind bars, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. The truth needs to be heard. My name is Judge Daniel, but I can't reveal my real identity for safety reasons. I spent over 15 years on the bench, making decisions that affected the lives of countless individuals. But over the years, I started to realize something that I could no longer ignore. The court system isn't as fair as it seems. What I've seen behind closed doors, the deals made, and the dirty politics played, it's something that the public doesn't want to know, and it's time for the truth to come out. I used to think that being a judge was about seeking justice, about making sure people paid for their crimes and giving them a fair trial. But as I sat in the court day after day, I saw a very different picture, one that I can't stay silent about anymore. At first, being a judge felt like I was fulfilling a noble duty. I presided over cases, listened to arguments, and rendered judgments based on the law. But soon I began noticing something that bothered me. The system wasn't built for justice. It was built for politics. Cases were being influenced by money, connections, and sometimes even by personal biases. It became clear that some decisions weren't made based on evidence or fairness. They were made to satisfy the interests of the people in power. I started seeing how lawyers could manipulate the system, how rich defendants got better treatment, and how the law seemed to bend for certain people, while others suffered because they didn't have the same resources. Some defendants were offered plea deals that were more about keeping the system running smoothly than about ensuring justice was served. The worst part, the system didn't care about people, it cared about profit. Cases dragged on for years, racking up legal fees, while the real criminals got away with it all. It wasn't about solving problems. It was about making money for law firms, for the government, and for the private companies that had their hands in the system. One day I came across a case that would change everything for me. It was a high-profile case involving a wealthy CEO accused of fraud. On the surface, it seemed like a straightforward case of corporate corruption, but as I dug into the evidence, I found something disturbing. The prosecution had missed key evidence that would have completely changed the case. When I asked the prosecutor about it, I was met with silence. But later I found out that the missing evidence had been intentionally ignored. Why? Because the CEO had powerful connections. He was donating large sums of money to political campaigns, and the pressure to drop charges was immense. The more I dug, the more I realized that this wasn't an isolated incident. The court system was riddled with cases like this. Cases where powerful people were allowed to skate by, while the poor and the vulnerable were punished harshly. It was like the whole system was designed to protect the rich and powerful, while throwing the book at those without the resources to fight back. I began to see how the law was being manipulated, not for justice, but for influence. As I spent more time in the courtroom, the truth became undeniable. The court system wasn't about justice. It was about maintaining a balance of power, and that power was controlled by the wealthy. I learned that judges, prosecutors, and defense attorneys often made deals behind closed doors, deciding who would be convicted and who would walk free. Cases were negotiated long before they even reached the courtroom. The law was just a tool to maintain the status quo. I saw firsthand how lawyers would use their connections to influence rulings. The more money you had, the more likely you were to get a favorable outcome. I witnessed clients walk away with minimal sentences because they knew the right people. Meanwhile, others, people with no money, no voice, were locked away for the smallest offenses. And when it came to sentencing, it was just as bad. Judges were pressured to hand down harsh sentences for political reasons, to show that they were tough on crime, even when it didn't fit the circumstances of the case. The system wasn't about rehabilitation or justice. It was about optics, about making sure the powerful stayed in control while everyone else paid the price. One day I was approached by a fellow judge who had worked in the system for much longer than I had. He told me something that shocked me to my core. Some judges don't even make their own rulings, They're told what to do by lobbyists, by political figures, and by corporations who have a stake in the outcome. And the worst part? They follow these instructions because they're afraid of losing their position, their power, and their influence. This was the moment I realized how deeply the corruption ran. It wasn't just individual lawyers or cases, it was the entire judicial system. The decisions I was making weren't just mine. They were influenced by a web of power that I had never understood until now. The people who were supposed to protect the public were being controlled by those who had money and influence. And that's when I knew I couldn't be part of this any longer. I had to make a choice. I couldn't continue in a system that was fundamentally broken. I had spent years thinking I was upholding justice, but the truth was I had become part of a system that was rigged from the start. I made the difficult decision to walk away from my position as a judge, to turn my back on the system that I thought I could change. But even after I left, I couldn't shake the feeling that the system would continue on without me, corrupt and unchanged. I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. So I began reaching out to journalists, to activists, anyone who would listen, to expose the truth about what was really going on in the courtroom. The moment I started speaking out, the backlash was immediate. My career was ruined, my reputation tarnished. I had exposed things that no one in the judicial system wanted to admit. And as I began sharing my story, I found out just how far the corruption went. Judges, politicians, law enforcement, they were all part of the same game, working together to protect the interests of the elite while keeping the rest of us in line. I realized that the system I had served for so long wasn't about justice. It was about power and control. The system was designed to keep certain people at the top, while everyone else was left to fend for themselves. And as for me, I lost everything. My career, my reputation, and my peace of mind. But at least I can say the truth is out there now. If you want to hear more about the shocking truths behind the courtroom, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to this channel. We expose the lies they don't want you to hear. The truth is out there, if you're brave enough to listen.